Hey class, going into our last week, it's cool that we get to end it off just in Revelations, just as Scripture ends in Revelations. But Revelation is it's one of those books that I personally have a love-hate relationship on or with. Um, I love it. It's a very in-depth and very confusing book, and you can get really lost in it, and that's the reason why I don't hate it, but it's just one of those books where a lot of people want to talk about it, but it's hard to talk about because a lot of the stuff really goes over my head, and there's a lot about it with just all the content that's in there and all the descriptions and so on. But it's a lot of it's definitely a book that requires a lot of focus and a lot of study, and so it's cool that we do get to dive into that a little bit. Uh, Recently in my life group, we actually they wanted to read Revelation, and it was quite interesting because the people in my life group were all kind of like different stages of faith. Um, have a lot of people who are new to faith, and also have a lot of people who have kind of grown up in the church and have kind of heard things like Revelation. So it was interesting to get kind of the perspective of a new person or someone new to their faith reading that book. Um, Definitely did a lot of prefacing of like this isn't everything, just because there's a lot of gruesome stuff in it. But the Bible's gruesome. It's just a fact of life. But speaking of the question, it's really cool. It's something I never really picked up on when I was reading through it. Jesus is described as the lamb, as a sacrificial lamb, and it's a cool like imagery. There's a lot of cool imagery in Revelations, but this is definitely one of my new favorite images that Jesus is described as this lamb, and going back to the Old Testament, talking about Passover and the importance and the significance of the lamb and the sacrificial lamb, um, and then describing Jesus as that. But I think God in Revelation, and kind of describing God in Revelation compared to the Gospels, I think we get um, a God who a God who we see a lot in the Old Testament, and it's a God that is loving, of course, but also um, very real and very violent, and he is hard because sometimes can come across as harsh, just by the way uh, the the things are described in Revelation. It can be very gruesome at times, but it's also, I think, a very full picture of who God is, and I think it's really cool because it is the last book in Scripture, and we're it's the Bible coming to a close, and it's what we have as Christians today. Um, it's what we have to look forward to. As weird as that sounds, because there's a lot of death and a lot of just kind of bad things, like the scary things in Revelation. But it's this again, this fulfillment, this promise that the Messiah is going to come back and God is going to reveal Himself, and um, so it's a cool kind of dynamic because we get this very Old Testament God, very harsh, kind of in your face, but all loving at the same time. We get that Old Testament God that we see in the beginning of Scripture in the very last book of Scripture, um, and I think it's just a cool reminder and a cool kind of almost slap in the face of this is who God is. This is the power that God has, and He doesn't do this stuff because He hates us, but in complete opposite, He does it because He loves us. But it's definitely an interesting book to read, um, especially studying it a little more in depth in this class. It's been interesting. I've done some studies and read some stuff that, and definitely learned some stuff. I feel like I always learn something new in Scripture, but especially when I read Revelation, there's always something new to learn. I feel, um, but yeah, it's a cool kind of idea. We get this Old Testament God and as this ending of the New Testament and ending of Scripture in general, that we get to look forward to. So those were kind of my thoughts. There was definitely a ton of stuff that you could have talked about, and I could have made this video 30 minutes probably just talking about the different areas and comparing the God we find in the Gospels to the God we find in Revelations. But I think the God we do find in the Gospels can be sometimes not more dimmed down, but definitely more appealing. I don't even appealing is not even the right word, but more just you definitely see the more loving side of God in the Gospels. Not saying that you don't see that in Revelation, but it's just a different form of love. It's kind of that tough love, that in your face kind of love. Um, Both are good, but definitely different. So cool setting this. Crazy that this class is almost over. But yeah, those are my thoughts.